Good afternoon, and welcome to the first of our series of public lectures by the Philosophy Theology Department. Let me begin with a very short reflection. This is from a favorite writer of mine. His name is Thomas Merton. If you haven't stumbled into some of his writing, if you should happen onto it, take some time, especially those quiet moments are almost always wonderful times for Merton. This is a very short selection out of his Thoughts in Solitude. I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end. Nor do I really know myself, and the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does, in fact, please you. And I hope that I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, will I trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me. You will never leave me to face my perils alone. I'm Earl Comfort, the chair of the Philosophy and Theology Department here at the University of St. Francis. And for several years now, we've had a custom of each of us full-time faculty offering a public lecture. And the series begins this year with our newest faculty member. You will begin to see flyers of this nature that list all of the talks that we will be giving this year in the program. Next month, if you haven't already seen the flyers, and you may want to take a note of this, Dr. Adam DeVille will be addressing Gifts from the East. Can Orthodoxy help Catholic leaders, or Catholics, the Catholic Church, overcome the child abuse crisis? About once a month, we will have a speaker on a topic of their interest, hoping that it's going to be of some interest to the rest of us. So come, enjoy yourself. Most of the time, they will be on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon. Sometimes they will be on a school night in the evening. But I assure you that if the last 2 years is any indication, the quality of it is well worth your time and energy. Tonight, or this afternoon, Pearson is speaking with us. He received his doctorate in philosophy at Baylor University in August of 2009, after previously receiving from Baylor a master's in philosophy. Earlier on, he had received 5 bachelor degrees. I think some of us were double majors. I have never met a quintuple major before. 1 in English, 1 in history, 1 in mathematics, 1 in religion and philosophy, and 1 in biology. And he served for a time as a TA in a biology department. He has publications. If you look him up on Google, you will find him out there in the field presenting in some significant journals. His doctoral dissertation a few years ago was on force and persuasion in Plato's Republic. This afternoon, he is going to speak to us about what use are philosophers addressing age-old misconceptions. As a very, very brief introduction to his talk, let me offer a couple of reflections. The word philosophy is a Greek word, philosophia, which dates back to at least the 6th century BC in its common use by Pythagorean writers. It was invented perhaps by Pythagoreans to clearly point out what it is that we do who are philosophers. It translates roughly into English as love of wisdom. Walter Lippmann a few years ago said, It requires wisdom to understand wisdom. The music is nothing if the audience is deaf. So it looks like we've gathered some philosophers here. His favorite philosopher is known for having said, "Wise men talk because they have something to say, fools because they have to say something." Lewis is not going to just say something.
Thanks to everyone for coming. Patrick, if I start talking really loudly, feel free to bring my volumes down, but you can use your judgment. Thanks for that. Well, thanks to all of you for coming out on a Sunday afternoon. I wanted to start with a little correspondence I had with my own mentor. He introduced me to the practice of philosophy. His name is Richard Kite, and he is the director of the D.B. Reinhardt Institute for Ethics and Leadership at Viterbo University, another Franciscan university. If you'd like to look him up, you can look up Richard Kite, Viterbo. It's easy to find him. Our correspondence went something like this. I told him the name of the lecture, addressing age-old misconceptions about the use of philosophers. And he said, "Looks like an interesting talk. How are you going to disabuse people of the misperception that philosophers are useful?" Of course, going against what I was actually doing. But I said, "After I waste an hour of the good people's lives, I'm hoping they shall be disabused of a silly notion that philosophers are useful. If that fails, I'm open to suggestions." So he said, "That sounds like a good idea." Hopefully that won't happen by the end of things today. But I want to start by saying today, did everyone get a handout? If you did not get a handout, I'll stall a bit, but there's some handouts just around the corner and through those double doors. Now, if you could, turn to the side that has the number 2 at the bottom. That middle quotation, I'd like to read that one. This is from Cicero, an ancient Roman, about the time of Julius Caesar, a little bit before the time of Jesus. "O philosophy, thou guide of life, O thou explorer of virtue and expeller of vice, without thee what could have become not only of me, but of the life of man altogether? Thou hast given birth to cities, thou hast called scattered human beings into the bond of social life. Thou hast united them first of all in joint habitations, next in wedlock, then in the ties of common literature and speech. Thou hast discovered law, thou hast been the teacher of morality and order. To thee I fly for refuge, from thee I look for measure, so now wholly and entirely. Moreover, one day, well spent and in accordance with thy lessons, is to be preferred to an eternity of error. Whose help then are we to use rather than thine? Thou that hast freely granted us peacefulness of life and destroyed the dread of death. And yet philosophy is so far from being praised in the way its service to the life of man has deserved, that most men ignore it, and many even abuse it." This is part of a series of disputations Cicero wrote while on retreat in his villa at Tusculum. This was probably, according to most historians, the most trying time in Cicero's life. His daughter just died, and he was stricken with grief. One thing Romans did not have any room for was a man who couldn't hold up his integrity and fiber in public. And so he took this retreat knowing that he couldn't really be the public figure that he was at that time because he was just crippled with the loss of his daughter. And while on retreat, he spoke with friends and he wrote these disputations, basically trying to figure out, why is it that I'm so stricken? I know that my daughter was mortal. I know that we're all mortal. And what he tried to do is find out whether a person could be happy by just being good, by just seeking what's true, living a life in accordance with wisdom, or if the vicissitudes of life, the fortunes that are dealt out to us, mitigate against that. And so it's not completely up to us whether we're happy. So I'm going to read another passage from him. Keep this in mind now, that he's on retreat, grieving the death of his daughter, realizing he can't serve as a public servant at the moment because he just can't stand up in front of the public eye and do what he's supposed to do as a Roman. So turn to page 1. I'm going to read the bottom quote from Cicero. "What am I to think, Brutus? Are we not made up of a mind as well as a body? But while a method for the care and preservation of the body has been sought after and found, one so useful that it has been called the invention of God's immortal, for the mind, no such method was thought necessary until one was actually discovered. Why is this? And now that such a medical science has been recognized, why has it not been studied with the same devotion as the other? Why are so many people suspicious and hostile toward it?" What he's saying here is we know that the body has ailments, that it has a proper order, that when it's instantiated means health. Why is it no one ever applied this to the soul? Philosophy found that order of the soul, found the things that make the soul sick or vicious, if you will. Today we have disciplines like psychology that have helped to pick up that train of thought. But Cicero is pointing out that it's philosophy, the love of wisdom, that helped us to first see there is a physicianship of the soul, if you will. So that's one ancient thinker on the place of philosophy. You can see we would consider this hyperbole, right? Grand exaggeration. Guide of life, explorer of virtue. Philosophy's brought all these things together, and yet we don't really read of philosophers in history. We don't really think of philosophers. Earl's on some people's speed dials, but most philosophers aren't on anyone's speed dial, the same way that, you've got the fire department, a babysitter, etc. We don't really seem to do anything except teach obscure college classes and talk a lot. And when we do talk, it doesn't seem like the words help, because words are useful, they're meaningful, they do things, we know that, but it doesn't seem like philosophers' words do anything, right? This is a critique that's almost as old as philosophy itself, and what we're going to do today is focus on the Republic of Plato. I'm going to talk about this book next and then get into the meat of the presentation for today. Some of you know a bit about Socrates because you're in my classes, and I told you a bit about him, but raise your hand if you've never heard of Socrates. Okay, raise your hand if you don't know how his life ended. Okay, Socrates was put to death by his city of Athens for corruption of youth and basically being an atheist. These were the two charges. He denied both of them. But in the end, he becomes in history what we consider the first martyr of philosophy. He tells Athens, "I came forward because I thought, someone must know what justice is. Someone must know what beauty is. Someone must know what goodness is. A friend went to the oracle at Delphi, the voice of the god Apollo, and got this strange oracular deliverance that no one is wiser than Socrates." This seems weird. This can't be right. Socrates says about himself, I'm the son of a stonecutter, basically just a bricklayer. I know that I'm not wise. I don't help to give the talks in the public forum to say whether we should go to war, how taxes should be collected. These people should clearly be wiser than me. So Socrates went and talked to statesmen. What is justice? Oh, it's coming to the defense of the defenseless. It's prosecuting criminals in court. Yes, those are just actions, sure. But what's the concept of justice that you understand, that you're applying so that you can recognize particular just actions? Eventually, they wouldn't have any idea. The same with beauty. He'd go to the poets. You teach our children virtue and how to live well. What is beauty? And again, it's this play that I wrote. It's this sculpture that I just made. Yes, those are beautiful things, but what is beauty? The thing that allows you to recognize this is participating in that concept. And again, they really didn't have an answer when pushed to the limit. After Socrates, basically teed off all these people, they didn't like being made fun of in public. At least that's how they perceived it. They were made to look like fools because the lawmen didn't know justice, the poets didn't know beauty. I'm cutting a lot of things out, but basically Socrates is put to death because he made a lot of people upset. And at his trial, he basically says, "The oracle at Delphi, I think now, told everyone that I was wiser than all else because I at least know this, that I am ignorant. And in so knowing this, I'm less dangerous than many other people are. Imagine someone who thinks he knows surgery who's never been to medical school. If you have something that needs to be operated on do not stand around this person. This is Socrates' point. He thinks he was sent by the oracle to be a gadfly, someone to wake up the sleeping horse of Athens and tell them, all the things you've been doing, the way that you've been teaching the citizens, the way that we've been going to war, it's not been based on anything that's tethered to the truth of the world that we live in. And because of that, we're suffering the consequences. At the time, they lost to Sparta, a giant civil war among the Greeks. Plato was a student of Socrates. He saw what happened to Socrates, and many of his dialogues pick up what Socrates did in his life to try to show, well, what is it that philosophy did? On the surface, it looked like it just showed people they didn't know what they thought they knew, a big whoop. Right? People still live their lives. They still act like they know what they're doing. They still know how to train horses, apparently. They know how to make plays that move people's emotions, apparently. They know how to make laws that work, apparently. So what was so important about what Socrates did? Well, the Republic of Plato is a foundational text for all of Western civilization. It's one of the places we can look to figure out what it was that Socrates did that was so important, despite the fact that it looks like we don't really think we need it. Christianity has been influenced by the book. The history of the world up to the present day has been shaped by this book. Our own modern-day American culture has been shaped by this book. I find, and I believe that most people who read it carefully will find, that outside of divine revelation, everything that has ever been thought or said in some shape or other is in this book. So I think of it very highly. So we will be reading some of it together today. It's the main quotation on page 1 of the handout. I'm excited about reading this together. The late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Echoes the same sentiments as the ones I just expressed. In a 1965 interview, Dr. King was asked if he were stranded on the proverbial desert island and he could have with him only one book other than the Bible. The interviewer was clear about that. What would it be? After thinking about it for a moment, Dr. King responded, other than the Bible, I think I would have to pick Plato's Republic. I feel that it brings together more of the insights of history than any other book. There is not a creative idea extant that is not discussed in some way in this work. Whatever realm of theology or philosophy is one's interest, and I am deeply interested in both, somewhere along the way in this book you will find the matter explored. So says Dr. King. So in exploring this one passage from the book today, I don't think it's a small task we have ahead of us, something so weighty. But as the ancient Greek saying goes, fine things are difficult. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the particular part of the passage we're reading, give you some of the context, and then we'll read it together. And there's going to be some doodling here. But before we do that, I want you to know, by the end of our time together today, I hope you come to appreciate some of the joys and depths and usefulness of philosophy. For those who leave the auditorium today hoping to learn more about philosophy, I hope all of you do. Or for anyone who anticipates being stranded on a desert island in need of a book that can be reread hundreds of times with a new revelation every time you read it, I highly recommend you get your own copy of Plato's Republic. Now, one of the greatest tragedies that can occur with respect to Plato's Republic is dismissing it because one has formed a false opinion of its content, either because one does not know how to read it, or because one chooses to rely on other people's summaries or commentary as a substitute for one's own engagement of the text, like SparkNotes, Wikipedia, that kind of thing. In case you don't know, summaries are a form of interpretation. If you ever find yourself in the fortunate position of actually having a copy of this in your hands, here's some advice on how to read the book. It's going to help the book open itself up to you so that you may be equipped to unlock its treasure chests. You can see past your surface impressions of it, or the impressions you get from commentators that you've read, and so that the depths of it may be illumined. I find this book is a lot like just a giant seabed of buried treasure. But here's the advice. Pay attention to every detail. Granted, what the characters say is important, the arguments that they give, but the characters themselves, the setting, every narrative detail that provides context for the story are also just as important. Bring all your literary skills to bear if you ever get to read this book. Watch for context, themes, character development, foreshadowing, and the like. Of course, bring all your rational and argumentative skills to bear as well. Watch for mistakes in reasoning, Watch for whether the mistakes in reasoning are intentional. Watch for good logical arguments, who makes the arguments and why. Watch for counterexamples and the like. Right. One other thing I'd like for you to know about this book. It was written about the middle of the 4th century BC, about 380 to 348 BC, by Plato. In other words, it's about 2,400 years old. So let's try to figure out how long that is. Let's get some idea of 2,400 years old. World War II began about 70 years ago. And many people who fought in that war were affected by it. There's not many of them left to talk about their stories firsthand. So that's about our lifetime. The Great Depression began about 80 years ago. Fewer people still alive. The American Civil War began about 150 years ago. The United States of America won its independence from Great Britain about 230 years ago. Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock about 390 years ago. Christopher Columbus purportedly sailed for India and ran into the Americas about 520 years ago. The printing press was invented about 570 years ago. Under William the Conqueror, the Norman conquest of England took place about 1,040 years ago. The Roman Empire fell to invading barbarian hordes over 1,500 years ago, never to fully recover from the invasion. Jesus walked the earth 2,000 years ago. Julius Caesar turned the Roman Republic into a Roman Empire, making himself its first emperor 2,050 years ago. Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire and most of the Near East about 2,330 years ago. And Plato wrote the Republic 2,370 years ago. Try to let all that sink in for a moment. This is a really old book. Now, I want to tell you about my first impressions with philosophy. They came from this book. But before I had those first impressions, the real ones, the one I got from actually looking at philosophers doing what they do, I already had preconceptions of what philosophy was. Raise your hand if you've ever had any idea about what philosophy was. You don't have to be right about it. You just heard philosophy and you just had this picture in your mind of what philosophers do. Anyone? Okay. I'll tell you what my picture was, and you can raise your hand again if it's the same picture that you had. My picture was people who have nothing better to do than sit around coffee shops and just talk a bunch. They don't really have problems in their lives. It's just, a bunch of random talk. Am I the dream of a butterfly? Right. That was my impression of philosophy. I had gotten along pretty well without it. I never took a philosophy class in grade school or high school. Never heard of philosophy really before, except for this impression I had. I don't know where I got it from. Anyone have an impression like that? Yeah. Okay. I don't blame you. So this is what I thought as a very young, arrogant 18-year-old. I think that's maybe redundant, arrogant and 18. But I thought I had everything figured out, right? I lived well enough to get to this point. What do I need to read a bunch of dusty old guys who lived 100, 300, 2,300 years ago? Things have changed since then. They don't know the things we know today. And again, clearly I had things together in my life, so why do I need to read them? I took a class because it was part of the curriculum at my college. Apparently the people who put together the curriculum knew better than the 18-year-old what I needed. And so we started reading this book. And the book opens with a discussion of justice. Socrates is one of the main characters, and there's another guy who's really, really aggressive, really well-spoken, outspoken, a guy by the name of Thrasymachus. And he says to everyone present at the little party, they're talking about things, justice just comes up. What's justice? Thrasymachus says, I'll tell you what it is. It's the advantage of the stronger. Whoever has the most power, whatever that person says, that's justice. You look at any nation, you look at a democracy, it's the people who had the power to enforce their will, and so they made the laws, they made democratic laws. And if you don't follow them, you're unjust. You look at a tyranny, a particular person had enough power to make all the laws, and if you don't follow what he says, you're unjust. And it seems like wherever you go, this is the definition of justice. And when I heard Thrasymachus say it, it was like the little fairy tale with the child calling the emperor naked. I felt like my world had collapsed. I thought, justice was a thing, We have rational discourse and debate. You know, everything about our culture, the things that we do to explain who we are and what we want, have a place in our lives. And Thrasymachus just said, no, it's all a show. It's all a way we mask the fact that there's nothing but power behind everything in life. And when he said it baldly and nakedly, it seemed true. It scared me to death. I thought, well, there goes everything. Everything I thought that had meaning is just, again, a masked force at play, using my power. So I might as well just go out and learn how to trick people with my words and study the martial arts, right? Socrates saved me. He basically showed, even though this seems true, and even when we get arguments that show that it's not true, there's still the intuition that it seems true. It looks like crime pays. It looks like there are people who don't get punished. It looks like there are people who are wicked, and even when they are punished, they seem happy in their wickedness. What do you do when you live in a world like this? Well, Socrates gave me the ability to see what was wrong with the world, and he did it through showing me the practice of philosophy. So I realized Thrasymachus wasn't right, but that didn't mean the world wasn't full of evil. It just means I knew how to address it properly, as opposed to just calling evil goodness and then being done with it. So this is the thing that helped me to fall in love with philosophy, this book. It's one of the reasons I think I stuck with it through my graduate studies, and I still am talking about it today. But I want to talk about the particular context that happens to surround the passage we're going to read today. So they've been talking about justice. Socrates soundly puts Thrasymachus in his place. He shows all these logical flaws in his argument, and Thrasymachus is basically, he blushes in public. It's really, really embarrassing for this guy who seemed to be so aggressive and so well-spoken. But everyone there says the kind of thing I just said now. Yeah, you beat him in argument, but did you really convince us you're right? And maybe this has happened to you too, right? Maybe you've been in an argument and you won, but the person still believes what he believes. Or you've been in an argument and both of you lose, or you both feel like you win, but you still feel uneasy because it was really about something else, right? Maybe you're afraid to say it, or you didn't exactly know what it was, so you couldn't say it. This is what the people in the story tell Socrates. Yeah, you beat him, but that doesn't mean we're all convinced. You just made him look like an idiot. So imagine him on CNN, right? You made the guy look stupid in front of a national audience. But we still, all of us viewers, might believe what we believe because all you did was make him look dumb. If you really are convinced that what you say is true and you're just not convinced that you want to look good in front of others, continue. So Socrates continues. The little 30-page argument he gives to show that Thrasymachus was wrong becomes a 300-page book because he's interested really in changing these people's minds and showing them what he thinks is true. So he goes along, they talk about what justice is, and Socrates finally comes up with this drastic claim. This is on the top of page 2. Unless philosophers rule as kings, or those now called kings and chiefs genuinely and adequately philosophize, and political power and philosophy coincide in the same place, while the many natures now making their way to either apart from the other are by necessity excluded, there is no rest from ills for the cities, my dear Glaucon, nor, I think, for humankind, nor will the regime we have now described in speech ever come forth from nature insofar as possible and see the light of the sun. And he goes on. The person he's talking to at that point basically says, Socrates, all of us here are going to strip down naked, gird our loins for battle, and attack you right now if you don't explain yourself. And what's happening here is what would happen today. Imagine someone gets up on a national stage and says, the reason everything's gone to pot is because we don't have philosophers ruling, or we're not having rulers philosophize. It just sounds weird. And it sounded just as weird back then. And Glaucon is saying to Socrates, it cuts off. The part we have here is just, if you don't defend yourself with speech and get away, you'll really pay the penalty in scorn. He's saying the same thing. Like, what? That makes no sense. So Socrates starts to explain, this is the philosophic nature. It's the person who is, he's a friend of truth, of moderation, of courage, of justice. He's a good rememberer, a good learner. He's charming. He's magnificent. And Socrates doesn't use these words lightly. He means very specific things by these adjectives. And he gets interrupted, and Adeimantus says, all right, hold on a second. Okay, yeah. Everyone realizes how being a good rememberer and charming and magnificent, etc., would be great for a ruler. And you're telling us philosophers are like that too. Well, Socrates, here's what's happening. You're really good at arguing, so you can make it look like we're agreeing with you, but it's just because we're not as smart as you. That doesn't mean we think you're right. You're just good at outsmarting people. So here's what most people think philosophers are. They're people who are either useless, because they don't do anything except for talk, or they're outright vicious. When they do talk, they convince people that everything they believed was wrong, and they just break down the moral fiber of society. So it's really weird for us listening to you, Socrates, when you tell us philosophers have to rule, when all we ever think of about philosophy is guys talking in a coffee shop, or guys undermining the moral fabric of society. So explain to me what's going on here. And Socrates says, all right, fine, I will. So this brings us to the passage we will read together. I'm going to read it through once, and then we'll go back through it slowly. I'm on the top of page 1. Conceive of something of this kind happening, either on many ships or one. Though the ship owner surpasses everyone on board in height and strength, he is rather deaf, and likewise somewhat short-sighted. And his knowledge of seamanship is pretty much on the same level. The sailors are quarreling with one another about the piloting, each supposing he ought to pilot, although he has never learned the art and can't produce his teacher or prove there was ever a time when he was learning it. Besides this, they claim it isn't even teachable and are ready to cut to pieces the man who says it is teachable. And they are always crowded around the ship owner himself, begging and doing everything so that he'll turn the rudder over to them. And sometimes, if they fail at persuasion and other men succeed at it, they either kill the others or throw them out of the ship. Enchaining the noble ship owner with mandrake, drink, or something else, they rule the ship, and using what's in it, and drinking and feasting, they sail as such men would be thought likely to sail. Besides this, they praise and called skilled sailor, pilot, and knower of the ship's business, the man who is clever at figuring out how they will get the rule, either by persuading or by forcing the ship owner, while the man who is not of this sort they blame as useless. They don't know that for the true pilot, it is necessary to pay careful attention to year, seasons, heaven, stars, winds, and everything that's proper to the art, if he is really going to be skilled at ruling a ship. And they don't suppose it's possible to acquire the art and practice of how one can get hold of the helm, whether the others wish it or not, and at the same time to acquire the pilot's skill. So with such things happening on the ships, don't you believe that the true pilot will really be called a stargazer, a prater, and useless to them by those who sail on ships run like this? Indeed, he will. So I'd like to draw this. I'm a bit of a visual learner myself, and I found it often helps when I talk about this passage. I would like a volunteer to help. What I'd like to do is have someone read along through here, and I'll stop the person as the person reads and draw the image that Socrates is giving us. Right before this, Socrates tells Adamant, see how greedy I am for images. Picture this in your mind. So let's picture it together. Make sure we have the same picture by drawing it out. Could I get a volunteer for someone to read this as I draw it? Okay, Rosemary, go ahead and start for us.
Okay. Conceive something of this kind happening either on many ships or one.
Okay, I'll stop you. Thank you. Many ships or one. Let's just go with one ship. So let's get a ship in there. Here's my ship. Need to make it really big because I'm going to put a lot of guys in this. Here's my ship. Okay. Okay, thanks. Keep going.
Though the ship owner surpasses everyone on board in height and strength, he is rather deaf and likewise somewhat short-sighted, and his knowledge of seamanship is pretty much on the same level.
Okay, thanks. So let's put that in. There's a ship owner. Okay. So let's put it, he's going to be really big because it says he surpasses everyone in height and strength. Let's get this guy in. I don't pretend this is going to be pretty. Okay, he's not a captain, but this means he's the ship owner. You see that? Let's zoom in on the ship owner. Because I'm going to add had some stuff. Okay, so he's short-sighted. They didn't have glasses, but this is going to symbolize he's short-sighted. Okay. And here's a little ear horn. Right? He can't really hear that well. Okay. And to show that he's bigger than everybody else, let's put some people in here. Here's another guy. You see those? All right. Let's get the white contrast. There we go. Okay, keep going.
The sailors are quarreling with one another about the piloting, each supposing he ought to pilot, although he has never learned the art and cannot produce his teacher or prove there was a time when he was learning it.
Okay, thanks. So, again, this is going to be very anachronistic, but, you see, all right, but.